Hello, welcome to another video all about Visual Studio. In this video today, I thought I'd do a little bit of a tutorial on how you can roll back Visual Studio to a previous point in time. Now, with Visual Studio, as with most bits of software, from time to time, Microsoft release updates to it. And from time to time, those updates cause problems with the software. Now, we saw a lot of that with Visual Studio 2019, which, in my opinion, was the worst Visual Studio that they ever made. See my other videos for more information about why I think that. But with Visual Studio 2019, we sort of hit this scenario where you'd be using it and it'd be okay. And then Microsoft would release an update. So you'd install the updates and it would just break something. So it didn't generally fix anything else. It would break something existing, and usually it'd be something quite serious, something that would affect your workflow and really get in your way. And at those moments you'd think, I wish I hadn't installed that. I wish I could roll it back. And you can't. There is no way to actually roll back Visual Studio 2019 or Visual Studio 2022 to a previous point in time. I'm going to show you a way you can kind of get around that shortly. But it's a real problem. It's a real problem that whenever there was an update to Visual Studio, you'd think, okay, well, now I have a problem with it because I updated it. So the next time they update it, I'll install the update and then it'll fix my problems. Well, maybe it would fix your problem, but if it did, it would introduce another one. So you'd get into this catch-22 where every time there's an update, it would break something major and you had no real choice but to go with it. But as I said, it would have been great if you could just like say, okay, uninstall that update. Now you could always uninstall Visual Studio and just reinstall it, but you know what a pain that is. You've got all of the workflows set up, you've got all your SDKs installed, and you've got extensions installed. It's not a simple thing. Plus, you've got a job to do. You know, you've got to get your work done, and you can't afford just to take time out to be faffing around with your software. So, Visual Studio 22 came out about 2-3 weeks ago, and it's good. Visual Studio 2022 is pretty good, but bear in mind that at the moment, Visual Studio 2022 has had a load of work done on it. It's been heavily worked on, and quite often when software is first released, it's actually relatively bug-free because it's been so heavily tested. What happens over time is as bugs do appear and they get fixed, then the biggest problem is regression bugs. So regression bugs, basically bugs that you fix something and it breaks something else, they're going to be much more likely after the software is first released. So what you're likely to see with Visual Studio 2022 is it deteriorate a bit. Now, I'm not being all pessimistic. This is just past experience of other Visual Studios. So you're going to be in a scenario where, let's say you've got Visual Studio 2022 installed now and you're using it, and at some point in the future, Microsoft will bring out an update. If you install that update, there's a good chance it will break something else. It's just the nature of it. So what you want to do in that scenario is you want to be able to upgrade without fear, I suppose is what I'm saying. You don't want to always be worried that an update is going to break things. Therefore, you never update the software. So what you can do, and I'll show you how to do this in just a minute. We will get to it, honestly. What you can do is you can do what's called a side-by-side installation. Now, let's start looking at that. If I go to Microsoft's webpage on the subject, Microsoft have got a page here, and I'll put a link to this in the description below if you want to go and read it for yourself. And this is an up-to-date page. I mean, the date here is the 15th of November. So today is the 25th. So this is only last updated 10 days ago. And this explains how you can install two instances of Visual Studio side by side, and this is minor versions as well. So obviously you can install Visual Studio 2019 and Visual Studio 2022. That's not a problem. But this shows you how you can install Visual Studio, say 16.4 and 16.5 side by side. Except this doesn't work. This is a load of old cobblers now. For some reason, skipping ahead a little bit, if you look at this where it says install minor Visual Studio versions side by side, this talks about how to do it, and it's basically saying run this command line. So you launch Visual Studio setup from a command line, and it'll let you do a side-by-side installation. This doesn't work anymore. This used to work. I used to use this to do side-by-side installs, and now it doesn't seem to work. And if you run this, you get an error that says one of the arguments, there's an argument that says hyphen hyphen or dash dash env is not a valid argument. And long story short, you can fix it by doing all kinds of horrible stuff in the temp folder. But the good news is you don't need to worry about doing command lines now. It seems they've built this into the installer, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Why would you want a side-by-side installation, I hear you ask? That's a good question. The whole sort of strategy for mitigating against upgrade issues and errors is that you basically install Visual Studio on your machine and you use it. And then when there's an update, you don't update the installation you're using. You basically have a second installation and you update that. And then if the second installation, to the latest version goes wrong, then you can just use the first installation. You don't have to roll anything back. You just click the other shortcut. Again, I'll show you how that works and how it looks in a moment, but that's the sort of strategy we're going to be using. So I'll put a link to this in the comments. I recommend you completely ignore it, and we'll crack on. So I'm going to show you this with Visual Studio 2019. This will work with Visual Studio 2022. I don't know if it will work with Visual Studio 2017, but then that's probably not so important because I doubt there's many updates for Visual Studio 2017 anyway, so probably irrelevant. So we've got Visual Studio 2019 installed here, and this is a little bit out of date, this one. If I say continue with that code and we look at the version, you can see we're on version 16.4.27. So there is an update for that, but I don't want to update this. You can see down the bottom right, version 16.11.7 is available. We don't want to do that. Tempting as it might be, we want to leave this installation intact because let's say we know this is working and it's got all our stuff installed. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this and click the start button and just type visual, and we get the Visual Studio installer. So we click on that and it brings up the installer. Now, what you can now do in here is you can actually do a side-by-side install from here, which you couldn't used to do, hence the command line requirement. But we're not using Linux, so we don't like using command lines. We like using GUIs. So let's go with this. Now then, what you want to do, there's a few steps here. If you click on the Available tab, it will show you the available installers that you have. And you can see I've got an installer for Visual Studio Enterprise 2019. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Install for that one. And it says, please update Visual Studio installer before proceeding. Now, the first time I saw this, I thought it just wanted to update Visual Studio, but it isn't. This is only updating the installer, so that's fine. So it says Visual Studio installer if you read it properly, like I didn't. So click update, and we'll say yes to that. And this will update the installer. Doesn't take too long to do. Go on, you can do it, 90%. There we go, right. And it will say getting things ready, and it takes you to the workloads page where ordinarily you could go in here and you could choose a workload, or you could install individual components that you need for whatever you're using Visual Studio for. Don't do any of that. We'll sort that out in a moment. There's a really easy way to fix that, to basically copy your settings from your other installation. So leave that. Language packs, change it if you need to. The important thing is installation locations. So go to installation locations. And you can see here we've got Visual Studio 2019 Enterprise. So what I'm going to do, because this is a second install, I'm going to just rename this to be install B. And you have an installation nickname as well. The nickname is quite handy because if you put a nickname in here for this installation, then when you hover over the icons down here, it will actually come up with that on the tooltip. So this one says Visual Studio 2019. The nickname will appear down here, which is useful later, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So I'm going to call it install B. And basically what we're doing is Visual Studio, if I click on this button here, Visual Studio at the moment is installed in 2019 Professional. So what I want is for it to be installed in 2019 And I'm going to tell you what, let me just create a folder in there just to make this more clear. So I'm just going to go through all the UAC stuff, install B. Now I'm calling this install B because the other one, this one, I'm going to consider to be install A. I'm not giving this a version name because the version will change over time. And again, we'll see that. So we've got install B, select that folder. The nickname is install B. And you can see there's some other paths which we'll leave here. These are shared paths. Now, I will say as well that this strategy of having two installations of Visual Studio, so you have installation A, which is your main sort of daily driver, then you have installation B, which is the one you would upgrade and then switch over to, meaning that if there's a problem with installation B, you could just instantly go back to the first installation, which is still there, so you're not going to have any downtime. The only thing is that when you do a side-by-side installation, Visual Studio has its own folder, so each Visual Studio is its own instance, its own separate instance. But there are shared resources which may get updated. So for example, you can see here we've got shared components, tools, and SDKs. It may be that when you do an update, that shared resource gets updated and there might be a bug in there, which in which case this approach won't help. But I haven't encountered a bug in the shared resources before. The bug has always been in the actual Visual Studio instance itself. So just thought I'd mention that, just bear that in mind, that this side-by-side thing, they're not entirely separate. You know, there is some commonality between them, but it's minimal and pretty robust on that side of things. So with this selected, let's just go ahead and do install. Do I want to continue without workloads? Yes, I do, because I'm going to add those later. So we'll go continue and we'll go yes, and then we'll just wait until this does its thing. So it's worth saying as well, when you do this, just pick a time to do this when you've got a little bit of downtime. So let's say you're between jobs, or it's a Friday afternoon and you've finished early and you've got an hour to spare. This is a good time to actually set this all up. So you've got the two installations side by side. I wouldn't recommend doing it in a hurry. If you're really busy, just carry on with the one installation and just use that and don't upgrade it. And then when you get some slack time, you can do this, and because it does take a little bit of setting up. It's a bit of a pain doing this the first time. I mean, basically, we'll get this installed. Once it's installed, we'll then install the workloads, and I'll show you how you can export the workloads from your first installation into your second one. Also, bear in mind, you're going to have to reinstall any extensions that you've got, any Visual Studio extensions. You'll need to reinstall those, and they'll all vary, depending on what the extension is. So, for example, if you've got ReSharper, you'll have to reinstall that. Okay, so that's done now. So we now have two Visual Studios. They're different editions. We've got Professional and Enterprise. That doesn't really matter. It just happens to be how I've got it here. And it's launching itself here. So let me just close that so we can sort of declutter things. Right. So we installed Visual Studio Install B with no workload, so it doesn't have any kind of idea of whether you're coding web apps or C# or anything like that. So what we're going to do, on our first one, Visual Studio Professional 2019, which was Install A effectively, if you click on More, you can see we've got Export Configuration. So I'm going to click Export Configuration, and we've got this export location here. And I'm just going to click Review Details. Now, just to save time here, if I go to Individual Components, the only component I installed was, in fact, I don't have any installed looking at this. Let me just change that. Let me fix that really quickly. What I'm going to do, I'm going to modify my first installation and pretend now. We're going to pretend that this is a real installation with loads of things. So I'm going to go Modify. And I'm just going to go into individual components, and normally you'd have loads of these ticked, all your .NET frameworks and things. I'm just going to tick Windows Universal C Runtime because it's little. It's only 5 megs and I can do this quickly. So I'm going to install a workload into my first installation so it looks a little bit more realistic. So we'll do that. 99% for 99% of the time. I love the way they do these little things here. It's like it's on 99% for 99% of the time. Anyway, I digress. So What we'll do now we have a realistic Visual Studio installation here, we'll go more and we'll go export configuration and we'll do review details. And what you'll see is when you go to individual components is it will have all of your workloads selected, i.e. the one I just added. So we'll go export and the installation configuration was successfully exported and we'll click OK. Then what you do on your new install B, on the second install, you go more and you go import configuration. And this is great because when you do this, review details, it will have selected everything you had selected in your first install. So you don't have to, this is great because you don't have to then faff around in here, remembering what you're using and ticking things and launching Visual Studio and finding you've left something out. So this is just a really quick way to do it. And we'll go modify. And we'll say yes. And this is now going to do the same thing. And obviously this will take some time if you're downloading whole frameworks. And we got the 99% for 99% of the time. I was quicker that time. I take it back. I do apologize. Right. That's that done. So if I now close this and I go to here and we've got Visual Studio 2019 install B. So you can see how the that tag that we added in there has appeared on the link here, which helps you to identify it really nicely. So I'm just going to launch this. And this is something that I do. So I'm just going to say continue with that code. And what I'm going to do, you see the second shortcut here in the taskbar. I'm going to right click and say pin to taskbar. And now I've got the two shortcuts. I'm in Visual Studio. I can go about and it's version 16.11.7. So this is the one I'm going to use now. So as I said, remember, you need to reinstall any extensions that you've got. So do that. You've only got to do this once. You only have to do this installation and install the extensions the one time. And after that, this becomes very simple to do. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to close this now. And I've got my two Visual Studios, so I can fire up this one, which is, let's go to here. We've got 16.4.27. So this is the one that I've been using to do my work and it's all fine. And then on the right hand side, we've got the new updated one. So I'm just going to swap these around. What I do is I actually make it so that the left hand one is the one I'm using. And it means that when I don't have to remember which one's the latest. All I have to remember is when I want to use Visual Studio, I fire up the left hand side one. So this is the latest one here. So I would then use this, I'd load it up and I'd load up a project and I'd start working. And if I hit a bug, let's say there's something really nasty happened in Visual Studio, they introduced a bug that really badly affected me, then I can just close this and I can just go to the original and I can just load that. And I can carry on working like I did before. You know, I don't have to roll back or anything. It's just there ready to use. Now, the next time there's an update, let's say you use the new version, you're busy using this version, let's just fire that up, continue with that code, just because we're not coding. And we're on version 16.11.7, and we've been using this for a month or two. Let's say it pops up and says, oh, there's a new version, 16.11.8. Well, don't update this one. Don't update the left-hand side one you've got here. Instead, fire up the other one, continue with that code, and then when it says it's ready to update, you can go and click on updates, and you can then update this one to the latest version. So let's say we did that. I'm not going to do it because it will take a little bit of time, but we could then update this one, the right-hand side one, to the latest version, and then we can basically swap them around and then use this one. So this one is now, I think 16 point, let me have a look at the version number. I wish I could remember numbers better. It's why I could never remember people's phone numbers, or I can't even remember my own phone number, to be honest. So 16.11.7. So let's say that in this version, we updated this to 16.11.8 and we hit a really horrible bug. Then we would just basically go back to using the previous one and we could just carry on using that. And then when there's a 16.11.9 comes out, we can update the right hand one again, try that, see if it works. So you can just switch between the two. So you kind of you install that your first installation you use, and then do a second installation side by side, and then you would use that one. When there's an update, don't update the one you know is good, update the other one to the next version, and then start using that. And then if you hit a bug with that one, you can just go back to using this one immediately. If this one's good, then carry on. And then when there's an update, don't update this one, update that one. So you're kind of like stepping stones. You're stepping from one to another. What it means then is you don't have to be worried about updates breaking anything, pretty much, apart from those shared resources, which, as we said, don't tend to break anyway. If there's a problem, you can roll back instantly. You don't have to do any actual system restore or uninstall and reinstall. You only have to install the second one once, and after that, all you're ever doing is updating it. So that would be my strategy. That's the strategy I use now for updates. And as I say, prepare that there will be breaking changes in Visual Studio 22. It's inevitable. Yeah, as always, I hope you found this video useful. And until next time, thanks for watching.